Hello and welcome to Chaos Effect. We dropped the history because we're kind of maybe thinking about covering some other things besides history. Isn't that right, Tyler?
Perhaps, yes.
Anyway, today you got me, McLean Hirschfield, the greatest host you'll ever have on a podcast.
Debatable.
And with me, almost always.
Hello, it's me, Tyler, man.
Very enthusiastic. I'm Alessandra. I'm back. Hi.
Hi. Our views went up last time you were on, so we're bringing you back again. And
Yay.
today, kicking off
Absorb.
us kind of stepping a little away from history, we're talking about politics and media. I'm sorry.
Fun stuff all around.
Yeah.
So, first, just how's everybody doing? We all doing good?
Yeah. I mean, I just got out of my theater history class, so my brain is turning.
So I mean, where do we start with one? I think we're in a weird media dead zone almost, where
Dude,
it seems like anything that is being produced is finally just being released because it was kind of people were holding out for movie theater releases. And then the other half of what's coming out is stuff that people are pushing to be made when you really shouldn't be making movies still, because I'm sorry, the film industry is not the most important industry to be running right now. And quite frankly, it's kind of dangerous to have it. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the current state of the film industry and media industry in general?
I mean, people gotta adapt no matter what.
Yeah.
So from what I know about how the film industry is functioning, with like you have like designated COVID safety people on board and everybody's requiring to testing, and like if you're not on screen you're wearing a mask and they're limiting the amount of people. Like I feel like especially now, which is in such a depressing time period, we film is like very necessary to help keep up the spirits of the people. So it's definitely not ideal, and um but I'm 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 glad some stuff is still happening. Like I've been very much enjoying the stuff that's been coming out recently. I didn't watch any new movies in 2020 other than like a handful, but um, WandaVision slaps.
I haven't
Yeah.
seen it yet. That's something I am looking forward to. I mean,
Yeah. Oops, sorry.
um, Tyler, I agree with your point on adaptation. It's simple and easy to say, like, we are in a pandemic, people are dying. You should not be doing X, Y, or Z thing. But then you turn the page on the fact that this is people's only income, and of course there are people like who are very rich and very famous and who aren't going to really suffer as a result of not having work. But then you have the smaller jobs, people who do like the gaffers on sets, people like that who need to be
PAs.
working, need these gigs to support themselves. And it's the same thing with theater. The theater industry is really, really suffering right now. But I think that, Netflix just released a film, Malcolm and Marie, with Zendaya and John David Washington. The
Yeah.
director's name escapes me, but I read about it, and it was a 22-person crew. They were all just like in the house the whole time. And I think that if you're shooting like that, if you're taking all these things into consideration, um, then it's okay to do your job, because it is a job. And like Tyler said, it's something that is so crucial to keeping spirits up in a time where we're all just kind of inside and sad a lot.
Yeah, well, and I absolutely agree. I mean, I think if you're doing it safely, but I mean, the problem is, as we get with everything, there's a lot of cases that we hear about where the movies aren't doing it safely. Or, I mean, in the case of Hollywood, I mean, they shut down a testing facility to shoot things for, I think it's like a Mean Girls remake or something ridiculous like that. They shut down the testing facility to shoot a few scenes there.
And we just and again, like last night we just had we just had the Super Bowl. Like yeah,
Yeah,
you know
which
what?
shouldn't have happened. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, like football is such an essential part of like American culture, and like there's nothing wrong with the game happening. Hell, even the half show, like everyone was, except for the weekend, was masked up. But like you have like people like spectating in the stadium and like thousands of people there, even at limited capacity. Like you did not need to do that if it's
Yeah, there an audience of 25,000 people was in no way necessary or right. I
I
think that
mean,
go ahead, McLean.
going completely on TV would only affect their profits, I think, as to the point of, I don't know, a decimal or two, maybe. I mean, the loss they'd have from not having people there in person wouldn't really, in my opinion, be worth endangering 25,000 people.
Yeah, and all the people that those 25,000 people are inevitably going to interact with, because if you have people who are, careless enough to, think that going to the Super Bowl is okay, then they're definitely
Right.
not going to be the type to isolate themselves for 2 weeks after the fact.
Yeah. Or even to like take a week to like see if they're okay. Like, which, I mean, in my opinion, like if this was an ideal society, the government would like be, launching stimulus to make kind of paying people to stay home and, doing stuff like funding the arts industry, because without the arts, there wouldn't be society. And that brings me to kind of talking about what the main thing I want to talk about is kind of the culture war that has begun between how conservatives and liberals and leftists and everybody else on the spectrum of fun politics kind of warps media as we consume it. And I guess I want to kind of start this off where what was the first movie where you noticed politics being a part of the movie?
Star Wars.
I mean, do you mean that in the sense of like understanding that there was a political,
Or
theme or
I
struggle,
guess what I'm
or
trying to say
like
is when
that it was a commentary?
you started applying your view to the movies.
Never mind, it wasn't Star Wars. I just remember sitting there in like the Senate scenes. I'm just like, get back to the lightsaber.
Bro. It's hard to say, but the first films that came to my head were the later Harry Potter films. And I read those books as well, so there was, the layers of experience with that, but it was not even the directly like overtly political aspects of it that I would apply my views to, so much as the discrimination that, muggles and like half-bloods would face, at the hands of like families like the Malfoys. Because, as a Jewish person, it's always that immediate connection of like, oh, okay, like this group of people who has no real obvious distinction, but is, treated as lesser because of what's in their blood, or something like that.
I think it was the first time I saw a Neil Blomkamp movie. If anybody remembers him, he did District 9. Elysium was the one that got my attention. Elysium's a movie where the rich live on like a miniature planet they built essentially. Yeah. And all the poor people live on Earth, and like you can technically immigrate there, but the process is near impossible, too expensive. And if you're caught trying to legally immigrate to obtain things like medicine and healthcare that all the rich people have access to, they'll like beat your ass or like kill you.
Gee, sounds relevant.
And I
I'll have to
mean,
give that a watch.
unfortunately, it's an okay movie, but I love
Yeah,
it.
it's like whatever.
I love it. I will like die for that movie.
Conceptually, it sounds great.
You know what? It really does. And then they kind of, it's a little all over the place, but I fucking love that movie.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I just like, I think I watched it. I was like, movies aren't political. And I was like halfway through that, I'm like, oh, this is all political. And then it made me think, it's like, man, this is crazy. Like, yeah, this is all the stuff that's happening under Donald Trump. And then I had a thought of, wait a minute, this movie was made way before that. Is
Yeah.
it possible all this stuff that we didn't like Donald Trump doing on the border has been happening way before, and
Yeah.
it's just a
What
product of
politics
both
existed
sides?
before 2016?
Crazy.
No,
Yeah, honestly, one of my favorite films that has launched a lot of like socio-political thought was one that I saw in 2019. It's called Children of Men. It's from I think
Alfonso Cuarón.
2009. Yeah, Alfonso Cuarón, who is just such an interesting director. But I wish I had seen that movie when I was younger so that I could witness my own developing outlook on the plot and the story. I don't want to say too much about it because it's just so good to watch, like not knowing much going into it. But Children of Men, I would definitely recommend. It's so good.
For me, honestly, the first Iron Man movie was a big like political awakening because like as a kid, especially like growing up in like the early 2000s, like you hear so much about like the Iraq war and all the shit that's going on in Afghanistan and terrorism, but like um I never saw any of it. I just heard about it secondhand. But like that was the first movie that I got to see and have like some sort of impression on me that like depicted terrorism in such a way, and contradictory to what I became later in high school. I was a very socially progressive child, and I was very much aware of like, damn, selling weapons to terrorists and then and doing all that shit that Tony Stark did, and just like having all that money and just not giving a fuck. Like I was aware that Tony Stark was an asshole, and all that kind of stuff in that movie was like the first like exposure that I had to the real. I mean, of course, it's a fictional movie about a man who makes a metal suit and flies, but like that was the first exposure that I had to any sort of like real American politics and the effect that we had in the Middle East. So I was always just like, yeah, fuck that. And that was
Yeah,
a huge part of
the MCU, I think, deserves a lot of credit for drawing attention to things like that. Of course, there are some people who it just goes right over their heads, and you know,
Ooh, hey, those are cool weapons.
and that's fine. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and say like, oh, like you have to like deeply analyze, you know, everything that goes on in this movie and apply it to real life because that's what it's based on. Like, you can just sit and enjoy the movie, and that's fine. But I think there is something to be said about the way that the MCU has integrated so many relevant
Well, I think
topics.
superheroes are a really good way to see where the American psyche is at any current moment.
For
yeah,
sure.
100%.
For example, I think the fact that one of the biggest superhero franchises out right now are The Boys, where all the superheroes are
Yeah.
evil, tells you a lot about what we're thinking now. But I mean, if you look at Marvel in that period of time, they kind of got what I would say was the general liberal mindset at that time, which was a wealthy person doing all the right things to help and further mankind. Which, you know, I'm not being critical. I think that's just a general hope. It's like, man, we hope all these people with money and power do the right thing and help us out. And then you have Captain America, who's your ideal, but he never does anything, despite being a man from the 40s, never does anything discriminatory and is for everybody.
Yeah, he kind of takes all of the best of that era with, you know, his cordial nature and spirit and things like that, which is so unrealistic. But I mean,
very true to the
we are
comics.
Steve Rogers
We
stands.
love Steve Rogers.
We have no qualms with that man.
I mean, sure, his actor takes pictures with Dan Crenshaw and then says, "How could we let the storming of the Capitol happen?" But you know,
I'm not gonna hate on Chris Evans today.
No,
it's not what I'm here to do.
No, I'm not. I'm just being a little critical.
Understandable.
And you know, I think in addition to that, Star Wars kind of recently, in the more recent, at least Rogue One. Let me explain Rogue One. I think a lot of people walked out with sour taste because when you saw a certain scene in that movie where you see rebels attacking Imperials, it kind of looks like the Imperials are us, America. And I think quite a few people went with, you know, that there's that classic comedy sketch that roams around the internet, the two Nazis going, "Are we the baddies?" And I think a lot of people left the theater. I know I definitely left the theater. It's like,
that's been the intent with Star Wars since the very beginning. With the first movie in 1977, George Lucas has talked about this a lot, how the rebels are based off the Viet Cong.
Yeah, Comrade George is like, yeah, I believe that there needs to be a rebellion of people to fight an empire like America.
Yeah.
Like,
And I don't know. I personally like I love Rogue One. Rogue One is in the top half of Star Wars universe films for me personally.
To me,
And it's partially for that reason, honestly. I think it does just a brilliant job of filling in the gaps, before the original trilogy, and so on and so forth, nerd shit.
yeah,
well, and for the most part too, there's no wizards with sabers jumping around at like a million miles per hour, like swinging and cutting through everything. It's all kind of, I don't want to say grittier, but a bit more real, that these people don't have like those special powers that will save them. They're
Hmm.
very human, very normal people. So now for the uglier side is I also kind of want to talk about like what's like we clearly see as propaganda in media.
Call of Duty.
And yeah, I mean that's like the first one. The military has put a fat. The first one I actually came to mind, and I'm very careful about my next few words when I bring this up. But American Sniper.
Oh, I saw that movie in theaters.
Does anybody remember the discourse around that movie?
I vaguely, I did not see the film because I had no interest. I'm not really a war movie person. I love Hacksaw Ridge, but other than that, I don't
Yeah.
really.
So Chris Kyle as a person is problematic. And I'm being very careful with how I talk about him because his wife is very Sue happy. He writes about people from the Middle East in a way I'd say is objectively offensive. And he also claimed to travel to Katrina during a hurricane and shoot at looters, which, we might do an episode talking about Katrina in the future here, but there's a lot of problematic things, and the movie doesn't leaves a lot of that out. So it kind of just makes him look as this good guy who is doing what he thought was best for his country and best for his family. Um, it's a really weird case, but and then I think there's a lot of people who went in and took. There's people who went in that movie and said, "Oh, this was clearly a movie about war being bad. I was mistaken." And then there was people who, as you said about Marvel, message went way over their heads, and that happens a lot with war movies. And I
Oh
think in
yeah.
our modern discourse, you can see that. Like when you hear movies like Apocalypse Now or Full Metal Jacket, the people talking about them, are they talking about it in a sense that they're talking about why war is so terrible and awful? No, they're usually saying, we love war. Yeah, we want more of that. And I think that this idea that also films a like completely liberal bastion too is a bit absurd.
Oh
The
yeah,
existence of
completely.
Michael Bay very much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
God help
we were just
us.
talking about Michael Bay.
Yeah, and I wanted to segue into that. So Michael Bay is working on a movie um,
I wish he would stop doing that.
called Songbird.
Society has to evolve past the need for Michael Bay.
Society never had a need for Michael.
I was gonna
Bay.
say, did we ever have? I mean, I guess the first Transformers movie did something.
I mean, when we were 13-year-old boys, we probably thought it was pretty cool, but then
Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah,
when you were a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's just it's the most tone deaf movie I've seen. This movie called Songbird. It's basically what if the coronavirus got worse, and how dare, but at the same time, it's like the government's gone too far by trying to keep us quarantined and away from each other. It's so incredibly distasteful or poor taste.
Yeah, it's
Deaf.
so tone deaf. I remember I saw a trailer for it on Twitter, and I was just thinking, I was like, who wants to watch this? Who wants to put themselves through that? It's like taking something that is a universal trauma on different levels for everyone, of course. But
This would be like
universally,
announcing
this
the 9/11
sucks for
movie on
everyone.
September 12th.
Literally, it's like oh, like the VR experience of, you know, being in the plane. Like,
You
what?
get to-
Hello?
What? You
Excuse
get
me?
to-
Like, who asked? No one. We all hate the reality that we're living in, no matter how horribly it's affecting you versus someone else versus
Well,
someone else.
You
It's
get to
like,
experience coronavirus, but worse.
yeah, and this gets me to the next thing, kind of, where I was using this as a segue. I'm almost a little concerned. Conservatives are starting to make a strong push into media.
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think that they haven't been there already.
No, but they're getting more money to do it now, is what I guess I'm trying to
Yeah.
say.
I mean,
The mind-
polarization will do that.
Yeah, polarization. For
My
example,
thought-
I forget his name, but some country musician, he's had the best sales he ever said because
Oh yeah, after he said the N-word.
yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. I like, not to be that person. I don't like to stereotype people, but I looked at that guy and I was like, oh, he would absolutely call me a slur. There's no chance. like it's just sometimes it's like,
I'll be to stereotype his entire genre that listens to this music, but country music, modern country music in general, is just like I look at everybody who likes it, listens to it, and it's like, yeah, you guys all just like when you think nobody's around, you guys scream slurs at the.
I mean,
in your
yeah, I don't know
car.
if that's necessarily fair. I think that like I think there's an issue with pop country specifically.
Yeah, that's
like,
what I'm.
I am very much into like more traditional like country sound.
Which
I
side
just,
are you on?
you know, I'm not a pop country fan, but I think that I saw this tweet and I do not share this opinion. It was just hilarious. That it said, in my eyes, all country artists are racist until proven innocent, or something like that. Which was funny, but I think it does kind of like illustrate even more so the regional polarization in the country of like what are the standards here versus there
Well,
and
and it's kind of
whatnot.
like it's the more acceptable pop music, even because I say this as somebody who neither likes modern country nor pop music, but modern country has really just become like, they're not going to curse too much. It's not explicitly dirty, and anything that's really said is pretty much an innuendo.
Yeah, that's
Gonna bring
definitely.
you on my big truck and drink a beer.
Yeah.
And you know, I might cheat on you, but it's cool because
Th-
I'm
this-
acknowledging that beforehand.
And I'll go
Like,
see, I'll go to church on Sunday and everything. Yeah.
and talk about being poor even though I'm not poor.
Very rich man.
Poverty
There's
is
that
really
Well,
meme
and I
of-
think the weird thing is country music is another great signifier, not where necessarily we're America in general, but at least where the right is.
yeah.
Because I'm trying to think, and I have a weird, like, I come from a family where country music was the more accepted genre of music. And there's a guy named Toby Keith.
Yeah, there is a guy. There is indeed a guy named Toby Keith.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that his catalog post 9/11 consists of such lovely songs, such as the Taliban song, where one of those main lyrics of the song is "Ride, camel, ride." Yep, and
Dear
the
Lord.
chorus is basically, I believe he's supposed to saying it's an Iraqi citizen being or an Afghanistan citizen being thankful America's bombing the shit out of his country. For those who are not watching the video platform, Alessandra's eyeballs just popped out over her glasses and she's now gathering them.
Oh my God, ignorance was fucking bliss, dude. I missed 30 seconds ago when I didn't know about that.
He also has a song called the American Soldier Song, which is about
I don't even, that's all I need to know. All I need to know is
I'm going on. I want everybody else to have this brain cancer too.
Cool.
He about being an American soldier, despite he's never served a day in his life.
That's like
and-
insulting. If I was a soldier and somebody who wasn't a soldier wrote a song about doing my job, I'd be like, fuck off. Like, you don't know, you don't get it. You know?
And like, I mean, that's, I think, a lot of media too. I've had one movie ruined by me with every veteran I've ever come across in my life that I've worked with at the museum I worked at, or just like met here at school during projects. And take a wild guess at what that movie is. Hurt Locker.
I've actually never seen Hurt Locker.
That's
where that admission
You know
comes
what?
out.
Yeah, and you know what? After just like Ask a veteran, like an army veteran, like, hey, what do you think of their Hurt Locker? And then you won't want to see it.
Yeah, I
And
believe that.
to me, it's actually kind of interesting because I think it gets into the disconnect of what, and I'm not a soldier. Tyler's not a soldier. None of us are soldiers. We discussed this
Considered
all
it.
before. We considered all of us considered it for different reasons and ways. But I think there is some sort of weird thing where I heard a quote where you cannot make a movie anti-war because there will always be some part of it making war appealing.
On that, um, you also can't do it in the United States specifically, because as I learned in the documentary, this film is not yet rated, which is fantastic. Also, one of my 2019 viewings that just I wish I could make everyone watch it. I learned that if you are making a film in the United States that has anything to do with like the military in any way, uses any type of equipment, et cetera, et cetera, the script needs to be approved by the Pentagon at every single stage. Every cut of the film needs to be approved by the Pentagon. So if you want to make an anti, US military or, any kind of film that expresses that sentiment in this country, good luck, because the Pentagon will not let it happen. The government will flat out just tell you, no, you cannot do that.
Well, what's the best example of an anti-war movie, in my opinion? It's Starship Troopers.
Oh,
Go-
yes. I'm so happy you forced me to watch that because I love it.
And let me tell you why, because it's a movie that makes it seem incredibly pro-war. And it's also a movie I like to use as a test when I talk to people. And it's like, because you'll get one or two actions like, yeah, dude, that's a fucking funny anti-war movie. Or the other answer is like, yeah, that's a really good idea, the mandatory military service, and you only be your citizen if you're in the military. Okay, we're not
You
friends.
need to get permits to
Anti-war
have
dude.
children,
Hey.
and then they send you to another planet where you get like ripped apart brutally.
And I thought about this too because I do terrible things, like I watch YouTubers do things like analyze Ben Shapiro videos and make fun of him, but I still means I accidentally, and he went on this whole tirade about how 1917 should have been the Oscar movie that year. And I'm so curious to what his takeaway from 1917 was, that he enjoyed it so much, because I couldn't think of a movie that made war less appealing than 1917.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
100%.
still haven't seen 1917. I've been lacking. Like I will fully admit I've been lacking in the movie
Let
department.
me
But
say this without spoiling too much. It is a movie that makes war seem pointless.
I mean,
Uh, Especially World
ta-da,
War
it
One.
is like
No, I
it
mean,
literally is
I'd
pointless.
argue
So
World War II had a pretty good point.
100%.
yes,
Yeah.
but
World
it
War One
it
is
happened
fucking goofy.
because of World War One, which was made
Yeah.
inevitable by stupid
Well,
shit.
I mean, I also kind of think there could be some debate if the rise of Hitler was necessarily only because of World War One. But yes, for the most part, as we know history, yeah, World War One and Two, they're one and two for a good reason. They're direct sequels.
Yeah.
Um, and the sequel sure did suck. Um,
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it did.
but like, and I'm kind of, I didn't know that you couldn't make an anti using a military equipment. So that actually makes a lot of sense to why Full Metal Jacket was apparently shot in England for most of it,
Yeah.
using Belgium equipment. Um, yeah, but I think that's the interesting thing. Like one of the things I've always said, I wish there was a Vietnam movie from a Vietnamese person's perspective. Not, it doesn't have to be a Viet Cong soldier, just somebody who lived there. Because I saw this tweet and I thought it was like, I kind of thought it was funny, and they like, hey, that's dark but funny, is like, I mean, how fucked up America is. We'll come invade your country, drop bombs all over you, and then make a movie about how it made us feel sad.
Yeah.
Dude, yeah. Dang dang, that's it. I'm honestly in general, and like I said, I can appreciate war films. I love Hacksaw Ridge, Saving Private Ryan, Dunkirk. Those are movies that have value, and I enjoy watching them for one reason or another. That's probably vastly different from the reasons other people enjoy watching them. But what I'm tired of is war films that are about the troops. And that is technically a negative statement about the troops, so I can't wait for people to come at my neck for that. But I think that the greatest war films that have yet to be made are the ones about civilians living in war times, because that's the majority of the majority of people are not fighting these wars. The majority of people are at home living in the product of a war that somebody decided to send someone else to fight.
Do you know
And
what
I think we
TV
need more of
show from
that.
our childhood did that best?
What show?
Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yes, 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 yes. We are literally the
I don't-
Fire Nation, and if you disagree, you're factually wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's the country that ruins the environment everywhere else, pretty much responsible for universal imperialism, and just kind of shows up and says that we're installing a democracy for your sake.
Yeah. You said
pretty-
like which childhood show? I was like Liberty's Kids. Like,
Dude,
Um,
the scene where Zuko, I mean, spoilers if you haven't seen a 16-year-old show by now, but the scene where Zuko confronts Ozai in the throne room during the eclipse, where he's just talking about how the Fire Nation had been lying to everybody the whole time about how we're invading their country to improve their lives, and he's just like, they fear us, they hate us, and I'm like, dude, that's America in a
Well, and
nutshell.
that show in general, it just had so many character perspectives on war. Like the main character was a survivor of a genocide.
Yeah.
The most of the characters are children because everybody else is fighting in a war. You go to a town from the perspective of essentially the enemy that hates you, and you have to pretend you're not that person. Zuko alone, and you see how terribly torn apart this town is by the war, to the point the soldiers who are supposed to be protecting them are essentially running a gang there.
yeah.
And then
As they do, as they do.
probably in the best 4 minutes of any television show to ever exist, you have Uncle Iroh's story in the Tales of Ba Sing Se, which shows, I mean, how war really, no, I forget what it is, but like there's nobody's truly ever unaffected by war. And I forget who said it. And it's a great quote. Tyler, do you want to talk about what you're showing us here?
This is a poster of Uncle Iroh and his late lieutenant with the lyrics from Leaves from the Vine from the Tales of Ba Sing Se. And
Gorgeous.
I'm in love with this poster. But I'm also in love with that scene and how everything comes together because of how it really highlights the tragedy of war, and especially the more you get to learn about Uncle Iroh's backstory, about how he was a high-ranking general, and he led the siege on Ba Sing Se for I think it was like 600 days until his son died, and it completely like destroyed him.
Yeah. And I
like-
mean, it's interesting too, because as a viewer of the show, like no one does not love Iroh. But when you think about it, people like Iroh, people like his son, are the ones who should be sacrificing themselves in those conflicts, are the ones who should be suffering in those conflicts because they are the ones spurring them on. So as horrible as we feel for Iroh, the reason that he is who he is, that he is this great character, this wise character, is because he suffered from the product of his own heinous action, you know?
Right, which most of the time, I mean, generals aren't heavily affected by it. So I think that's what makes that so it wasn't a thing he was against until it personally affected him, which I left Facebook sucks sometimes. And I see people like, we can't forgive Uncle Iroh because he was still an imperialist. And it's just like, you can, people change. Otherwise, nobody would win elections ever if people didn't change their mind on things.
Yeah.
Right.
People are annoying.
That's like a lot of the people, a lot of like conservatives shit on Biden for attending the funeral of a former KKK member. Keyword former, because the guy that they were talking about was indeed part of the KKK, but left the organization and spent the latter part of his life in government trying to push for equality because he obviously uh, realized how wrong he was. So if we go with this narrative that there's like if you do something wrong, that there's no way to be redeemed, you're just creating the villains that uh, you're you're so strongly against. Like, you need to show them a path to redemption. You need to
Well,
show them a path to like improving themselves. And I think Ira was a
100%.
perfect example of someone who improved himself and spent the last part of his life improving the lives of others and spreading his wisdom to make the world a better place.
I 100%
I
agree with
and
you.
that's and I think we don't see that a lot in American media at the very least, because I know people talk. I don't watch anime, and I know people talk about certain animes that have like villains become heroes, but we don't have that happen a lot in American media because I don't think forgiveness or redemption are things that we see as possible in our culture, because Americans have been taught that once you are guilty of something, you are forever guilty and you cannot change, and the only solutions are for you to be punished. You know, hence why we have characters like the Punisher who have kind of weirdly poisoned our media in some ways and our culture.
Yeah, the thing is with the Punisher is like I feel like he's just so strongly misinterpreted.
Oh yeah, but
For
it's the
sure.
weird thing where the misinterpretation has become what's more
It's
well
become
known
the
than the,
yeah.
I mean, so let's go into a little bit. I like the Punisher. It's one of my favorite comic books to read. There's a comic where two cops stop. They have a Punisher sticker and they say to the Punisher, "Hey, can we get a selfie with you? We're big fans of what you do." Punisher doesn't fucking like this. Frank Castle, my man, just walks up to them and says, "Cut this shit out. If you guys ever do what I do, I will find you and I will fucking kill you." Rips the sticker off and says, "If you want a role model, his name you have one. His name's Captain America," and then walks away with a duffel bag of guns.
Yeah.
We love
And
Punisher.
that was because the comic book artist was making a response to police using his symbol, um, which I'm kind of frankly amazed Disney doesn't use their impeccable trademark abilities to shut that shit down.
Yeah. I mean, that
Yeah.
is the same company that didn't let a father use a Spider-Man on his child's grave.
Dude, so gross.
But
Hey.
I,
Yeah, so the I guess the other thing I want to talk about regarding media too is also kind of how politics has created its own thing in every media too. I mean, let's think about YouTube, Twitter. Like there are just people who are personalities because of politics. They're not politicians, but they're commentators, and it's this weird existence we have. I don't know if you guys exactly know what I'm talking about now,
I think I'm getting what you're saying.
but I this was something I don't think, and I think it's maybe comes with the infancy of the internet, like politics and the internet. I mean, the internet's media, and I think we're seeing because the internet's still pretty new. I mean,
relatively.
most of us are. I mean, Google's been around less than most of us have. YouTube's been around less than most of us have. And things like Facebook are still very young. And what we're starting to see, I think, with things like QAnon is essentially the backlash of what this does when we haven't quite figured out how to use it yet and everybody's using it at once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people are going to use what is at their disposal to meet their own ends. And when it comes to like political commentators who aren't in politics, it's just one of those things where it's like, this is this person's niche, this is what they like, and they end up having so much influence just by reiterating things that have already occurred and then adding their own kind of opinion and 2 cents to it, which, in theory, anyone can do. But, of course, anyone can do that like anyone can be an actor or a painter or a football player.
Well, and what I'm finding more interesting is like the people you're hearing about who are like getting into stuff like QAnon are not young people. And like we were always the ones, keep in mind, told about the dangers of the internet. But it's people our parents' age. It's people who are old, people who are probably 40 up are the majority of these people falling
Yeah.
into these rabbit holes. And it
Yeah.
makes you wonder if it is it the danger of because they didn't grow up with the dangers they fell into. Like it's a really weird thing, and I'm quite frankly asking like what you guys think because I have no clue what's.
Yeah, I think it's just a failure on the part of the company um, holders to properly moderate their sites.
Or the
Yeah,
desire, I think, to properly moderate their sites. I think that like human selfishness is so at the root of a lot of the issues on the internet today, because if
100%.
you block certain pathways, you limit the things that can happen that will turn a profit for you. And I think that, giving, these unnamed people like the benefit of the doubt, like no one ever thinks it will get that bad, but that like things always get that bad. It takes time, but they will. It's like, not to draw the obvious, World War II comparison, but like I'm sure that many people were like, okay, yeah, like the Jews have to identify themselves with these stars, but like that's not that bad. I don't think anyone, or the majority of people, I don't think understood where that was going to go. And you can look at it the same way with like any other genocide that has happened, where it starts small. And then because people don't think it will go that far, that's exactly what it does. And
and
that can be applied to so many different things.
I mean this. I'm not faulting these social media for existing because this has happened. Like you can make a connection between the magazine industry and Rhodesia, the Rhodesian War, and like people going to Rhodesia to fight on behalf of a racist nation state. And so I think it's like kind of where there's a will, racism will find a way. Um, and the thing I think is really interesting too is internet's this really interesting double-edged sword where on one hand it allows for, I mean, all three of us probably have a YouTube channel we use to publish, and I mean this podcast is on a YouTube channel. We can all learn things from YouTube and the internet to do, we're all in film. How many times have you Googled how to do something in Adobe?
Right.
Yeah.
Like the internet has, like specifically YouTube has been such a great learning resource for me. It's just like not only like with like gaining new information, but also in terms of like social awareness and economic awareness. And it's been such a great tool for me, but it's this in the same way that it's been beneficial to me, it can be detrimental to others.
Well, and this kind of leads me to another topic. I mean, Tyler, I mean, I feel like you probably know about this, but do you remember Gamergate?
I remember Gamergate very vividly.
And I think you probably had the same experience I did of YouTube being like a favorite video game of yours, and then you saw this video of a guy with something called an SJW. It
SJW.
said us GWs have ruined so and so, and you clicked on it, and that took you down a rabbit hole, right?
I mean, I didn't go that far down the rabbit hole. It was more just like, haha, SJW owned video.
Yeah, but
That,
that's still like then you see stuff that really gets.
because they let me convince myself that feminism is a bad thing. It's like, what? Women having equal rights is bad? What? How could you possibly think that? Because of the way that it was portrayed in that era of the internet. It's like, yeah, of course, like you don't think what you're saying is wrong because it's like, all right, no, okay, so women should have equal rights, but what's wrong is the feminazis saying that men are inferior and we need to do this and that, and those guys are the crazy people. But um you can get away, you can like feel good about yourself by not saying directly that, yeah, women don't deserve equal rights, but in reality that's the kind of narrative that you're unconsciously pushing.
Yeah, I think that with a lot of those like kind of rabbit holes and things, it's less ideologies that are put down versus lifted up. It's the personalities that are perceived to represent them. So if you attach this like, like SJW, like whatever kind of visage to the idea of feminism, then nobody is going to want to support that cause, whether or not that image is largely representative of, the people behind it. It's the one that is viral. It's the one that is, perceived to be the central look by everyone else, and who wants to get behind, Nancy, who complains all the time and tries to ruin everything for men, and blah 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 blah. um and those images too, ironically, are in large part created by the people who are like causing the problem, like, the idea of like gingerbread people, or things like that are like super like specific type of like snowflake stuff, as people would say. Those things are oftentimes, created and boosted by the more bigoted people in society, and it just catches on to people who, are headline scrollers, like, as I call them. It's like you see it and you're like, oh, that fucking
Well,
thing, and then you keep moving on, and that's that,
and here's the thing, like, I think anybody who's a leftist now, for the most part, like, very few of us became full on leftists, like beyond Democrat, beyond, progressive, after until after 2016, because there really wasn't a place to learn about. No, I'm sorry, I know every freaking Marxist out there is going to say, if you all just did the reading, nobody likes reading.
You
It's not
read
fun.
theory.
It's a boring book
I would
written by a
agree,
guy
yeah.
who's kind of racist, kind of anti-Semitic, kind of sexist. Let's find something else. Just take the time to explain the good things of being on the left.
Mhm.
And besides my little rant about my problems with the political group I identify with, um, I think a lot of people, there wasn't a platform for like the left to counter essentially what became this like group of people. It's like, hey, let's look at these people who are like, we're going to call them radical progressives. And then you had a right wing group of grifters who were able to kind of feed off of that from these like small time YouTubers making fun of them, to then channel that into their mainstream audience, which led people. It's like, well, yeah, and I think as you said, it was like, well, yeah, look at this crazy radical lady. But then what happens is you have people thinking like you have this crazy radical lady saying something ridiculous, and then it turns into, well, yeah, I mean, of course, the gender wage gap makes sense if this and this applies, which I will not name this person, but I had a roommate at one point try to convince a room that was mostly women at the time why the gender great wage gap is okay for existing.
Yeah.
I didn't believe that was real for a long time. Uh,
My God,
I
my
thought it was
favorite thing to do in high school was to take out like the report by the Republican led Congress that like said the wage gap existed. I was like, explain this.
I was because I was just under the impression that like
Uh,
because I just because of all the women in my life, everyone just seemed chill. No one was really complaining. I didn't have any like strong feminist presence in my life, so like everyone just seemed fine. So in my head, I'm like, yeah, women are already equal. Why are you making this thing up in order to push dominance over equality? I didn't know what the fuck I was saying. I was regurgitating shit I heard on YouTube and what my friends were saying, who were even worse than I was.
and I'm sure we've all had the moment of where we think, or at least me and Tyler have, where we think about that, we cringe horribly. It's like,
I
God, I
feel
hope nobody's recorded that.
I feel like an immense amount of guilt. And I know it wasn't entirely my fault because I was just like a victim of circumstances because these were just the people that I hung out around and like that was just the environment that I
I know I probably spend once a week where I take a 30-minute shower and just stare at the tile thinking about every horrible thing I've said while having
right.
terrible political beliefs.
Yeah, like
Just like, oh God, and then you said, then you thought this. Jesus Christ. It's just
fuck, I
like,
was transphobic.
Mm,
yeah. Nope. Now just the writer of Harry Potter is.
Jesus
And
Christ.
apparently
Yeah.
the entirety of the island
No,
of.
nearly headless Nick wrote Harry Potter, and that's the narrative that I accept.
I I chose to interpret it as an autobiography by Daniel Radcliffe, where he just changed his own name.
Yeah, I think that's the other funny thing is like, cancel culture is now the big calling card of the right wing. And maybe some people, like it's cancel culture's not a thing, but maybe some people, like we said, need to go away. Michael Bay,
Yeah.
like
Like I'm very conflicted on canceling people.
yeah, no, like I think there's, I mean, who was it Michael or something Gunn? Was it
James Gunn.
James Gunn? Didn't he get like he had like
He got like canceled and then uncanceled.
well,
Yeah.
and because it was like a right wing led effort too, was the weird thing I remember from that.
Yeah, I think honestly, do honestly like, I think that cancel culture is most certainly a thing, but I think that a lot of people misinterpret the idea of holding people accountable for their actions as cancel culture. Like cancel culture is very much exaggerated by people who don't understand it. And it's also carried forth in a really extreme way by people who, as we were talking about earlier, don't believe in the idea of like forgiveness and redemption for human beings. Um, and I think James Gunn is a good example of that. He was, first of all, a guy, so you're already off to a start there of
Yeah.
like the ignorance that comes with not having to deal with certain things, by being born a certain way. And he said something that was horrible. Like no one is here saying like, oh,
I
like
don't even
what
know the
James
thing
Gunn
he
said was
said.
fine.
Okay, so
Could somebody? Because all I know is he said something. Like that's the other thing about this
okay, so
media. I don't know what he said.
Really bad.
It was like really bad.
So but the thing is, he was on Twitter in 2009.
Oh
and
no!
Twitter
I was
is
on Twitter in 2009. I was 9 on Twitter.
Why?
So
that was a total hellscape.
Sorry for my voice crack there.
So, but
That's
the
like
way,
being on
I think the
Facebook
way
now.
that retweets used to work, where you just like you have to like tag somebody's name, and then you write something, and then it shows up on their timeline. So like to fuck with people, he'd be writing like some like awful like pedophilic shit, and it was disgusting, and it was like obviously just like
it was
dark
basically
humor.
like really disgusting, horrible troll comedy was what it was.
It was like by no means am I justifying it, but not one that was like the internet culture at the time, so he's not special, and that was fucking like years before you hired him. So if you're going to have a problem with this, why not do a fucking background check before you fire him?
Literally.
And then
It's one of like, he clearly is not a person who holds the beliefs of like anything that he said. It's one of those things where it's like it was fucked up, and like we all like it is universally agreed upon that it was
And
fucked up. He knows, we know, everybody knows.
I think in Disney's now, there's I don't know if anybody else watches The Mandalorian.
yes,
But the actress who plays Cara Dune has said some incredibly problematic things.
oh yeah,
And still has her job and is kind of refusing. She's refusing to take credit or apologize for anything she's done, and just continues to be more and more problematic. And it's like, so you fire James Gunn for saying this, but this woman who continues,
Gina Carano's fine.
yeah, and it's this weird. It's a really weird thing of like, how do you avoid overcorrecting, and then how do you avoid just letting it go completely? Which
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
is
a lot of it is a product of a society that doesn't know how to hold people accountable properly, because until recently there was not necessarily a reason to do that. But like that's the complicated thing about the like surge in media use, whether it's journalism or film or YouTube or whatever it is. It's like you said earlier, it's so new and none of us know how to handle it. Not even the people who created it know how to handle it. And it's just this big experiment. It's a learning process for everyone. And that's really unfortunate because it is a super consequential learning process.
Yes.
Like there are things like you can't just chalk up, QAnon to be like, oh well, like we're all figuring it out. Like that's not what I'm saying.
if that
at
was
all.
saying, I did not mean to.
No,
What
like,
it is people weaponizing a very new thing against a very, very vulnerable part to our society. That, quite frankly, if we had things like better government regulation to shit, maybe that wouldn't happen.
mhm.
You know, like I guess the thing we talked about politics and media. I feel like we're talking about this because there's these things affect us, and a lot of times things are misinterpreted, and it's important that you maybe stop and think about. I actually want to like focus on that thing about forgiveness and redemption. It's something I always think is like a shame. Like, and I hate to be that guy, but there is few downsides to Marvel with the arc of Endgame not or Civil War not following the original arc. So does anybody know the comic book arc of Civil War
Yes,
besides me?
I read the
Right.
I
So
do not.
a school essentially school gets blown up by a villain, and it's caused because there's this C-list superhero team with a guy called Speedball that like bring a camera crew around them with them in hopes to get a reality TV show, which is it makes more sense in the comic. They do a much better job
No,
of
it
describing
Yeah,
it.
makes
yeah.
sense.
They're like
I'm
they're like
Anyway,
they're like
hearing it and it's
nobody
making
superheroes.
sense.
so basically what starts off the accords that like maybe we should have superheroes be registered is like a school gets blown up in the midst of a battle and it kills like all the children inside. And out of it comes hero Speedball decides to take on a new form called Penance, which is a hero that wears an armor with spikes in it, not on it. He doesn't have like spikes pointing out in it, and each spike is bigger depending on how young the child was.
Damn.
And
Wow.
I'm not saying you have to do that to get a character to show that he's on an arc of redemption or penance or whatever you want to call it. But that would be we don't get a lot of media where somebody starts off as the dictator or the guy who served under the dictator and then turns over a new leaf saying, "Hey, I want to be a better person," but has to pay at the same time. Like
Darth Vader.
Yeah. And I mean, that's honestly like something that, bringing it back to Star Wars for a minute, like that really upset me about the way that the sequel trilogy ended. Spoiler alert if you have, escaped
Who gives a shit about the
what
rise?
is the Rise of Skywalker. But the thing that out of all the fuckery in that movie, the thing that upset me most was that Ben Solo's redemption was immediately followed by his death. I would have loved if they're going to take that much time to make that mess of a film, at least spend 20 minutes, 25, a half hour, bringing him back to the Rebel Alliance, to the Resistance, and having him be held accountable for what he did. Have him go on this journey of making amends to the people that he has caused so much suffering towards. Like, that is what that needed.
bringing it back to Avatar, I think that's the thing they did incredibly well with
Yeah.
Zuko's ending arc.
And
Is
that's also why. See, but I'm also of the camp that like with I think where Darth Vader did it kind of had a Zuko kind of arc. I think Kylo Ren should have had just been a full Azula. Honestly,
Oh, I totally disagree with you.
I don't think Kylo Ren should have been redeemed.
I completely
do you know
disagree,
how I
but
would have
that's
changed?
for another
You know how
time.
I would have changed the ending for that movie? Have him be the one that lives through it, and have him have to go essentially walk into the desert and be essentially going on this journey of penance. I really like that word penance.
It
is
is
a good
just
it's
word.
a
sounds
cool word.
great.
But
Um,
speaking of those movies, you know who got really fucked over, and this is also going.
Finn,
John Boyega.
Rose,
Both
both of them. Both of them.
'Cause-
Guess what's the factor that connects the two? G.
Well,
it's
my favorite meme to come out of the Mandalorian is, "Hey, Bill Burr's character did a better job of conveying what they were trying to do with Finn in 15 minutes than they did with 3 movies."
absolutely like the the first of all, I think a lot of the problems with the Rise of Skywalker came from the fact. I mean, of course, there's like the fact that like they lost the director, and then like J.J. Abrams came in, and then he's just like fucking writing the
J.J.
movie.
Abrams, who is like notoriously
So-
bad at ending things. Like,
Yeah. So but like a lot of it was just like response to the angry backlash that The Last Jedi got, but a lot of that angry backlash was just from fucking loser fanboys.
Yeah, like little incels, like
Yeah, so
being
like
annoying.
There's things I wish I
The
didn't know exist.
the correct thing to do with Rose Tico, if you did not like her storyline, fucking like, sure, that's not a problem. You also can't cave into the people that went in to bully Kelly Marie Tran
Like
or
literally
something
off
like
the
that.
internet
So
completely.
those people literally fucking bullied her into oblivion pretty much. So what Disney did was they listened to those people and then just chopped her role significantly to like 2 minutes of screen time in The Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, like
I
it honestly, like the solution to that was literally this: write her better dialogue. That was the problem. Her dialogue was just corny. Like that was my only issue. I love Rose, and I will say that, and I will scream it from the rooftops. Y'all can at me on that shit any day. I love Rose Tico.
I'm an ardent defender of The Last
I
Jedi.
mean, to me, The Last Jedi was kind of like my experience breaking my leg. One moment I was having fun, the next moment I was in a lot of pain, and I kind of didn't want to be here anymore.
Jesus.
And that's kind of how I felt walking in and out of that movie. The thing I think about that too is it is like the whiny fanboys. You get this thing, and I absolutely love this, where it's just like you get these guys who are like, Kylo Ren's the worst villain ever. He's just like a whiny crybaby who just wants to bring back the Empire. Like, you fuckers?
Like, you, exactly. So
it's you. Hold a mirror up.
Alexa, play Mirrors by Justin Timberlake.
The reason why I really like the first two movies of the sequel trilogy, I think The Rise of Skywalker.
I didn't plan on us talking about Star Wars this much.
I love The Last Jedi, and Force Awakens, because of how because Star Wars has always been political from the beginning, and how it's able to portray real world ideologies rising from a fictional standpoint. Like what I think the sequel trilogy does really well, for the most part, until is explaining the rise of neo-fascism and how it comes from a place of idealizing the past. And
yeah,
I think Kylo Ren is a perfect example of how that works. Is like the way he pretty much like just jerks off to Vader's helmet. Like, it's
Well, and bringing it back to politics and movies, in the original trilogy, if you go into the lore of like why that these people are joining the Empire, there's so many like off-brand stories that are like, I was good, and then like Pa's farm got blew up by pirates because the Empire wasn't doing anything, so I joined the Empire, and then I realized we were bad, so I joined the rebellion. And then in the new one, it's like, well, you see, I've been brainwashed by an ideology to make me think the past is better.
Right.
And I mean, if you get to 1940s fascism, it's like a lot of those soldiers, and I don't mean to be the guy who's spreading the lie of the clean Wehrmacht myth, but probably more accurate World War One would be to say there were a lot of guys who joined because they quite didn't understand what they were getting into.
Yeah, I mean,
or didn't have a choice.
every society in every single part of the world in all of human history is guilty of the glorification of war.
Mhm.
And that's just that. And I unfortunately don't see that stopping anytime in the near future. I have hope that like we can move past it by the time I die.
I mean, I just want to say this though, like it's such a spectacle to see. Like, how many times have you been watching a war movie and you find yourself enamored by the scenes of explosions, and there's that swelling music that comes up over that heroic charge.
It's epic.
And
I mean, zero, but I find it. I mean, I'm enamored by it from a cinematic standpoint, but
exactly though.
Maybe it's different because, like, I don't know, as a girl, I don't see myself there ever. Like, I don't ever project my own image onto the screen in the same way that like men are almost conditioned to do as like
true. And I wanted to talk about
fighters.
toxic masculinity, but I want to also wrap this up pretty soon. I feel like if I went into like how toxic masculinity has plagued
we'd be
me
here for several hours.
I think that's
a whole episode.
That's enough, yeah, because I think Tyler and I, as young men who've been exposed to tons of media, can talk about how that's probably made us think terrible things and have terrible
Oh,
views.
100%. Yeah.
So we're gonna get into wrapping it up, and as always, we do our questions. And so this week we started off as a history podcast. So y'all, what would you choose as a historic event to do a movie on? Because we are all film majors,
Oh my
and
god, I just like
given the
died with
excitement, I think Tyler, no, Alessandro, let us hear.
I actually have been planning to do this for several years. I want to do a film on the evacuation of Saigon. That I want to do it so bad, and I hope one day to physically like go to Vietnam and just like sit and write it and talk to people and like do all of the research. Oh my god, I just that's my thing. I could go on, but
Yeah,
I
and
will
you're
not.
gonna hire me and Tyler because you'll
You'll
need
do
an
all
action.
my explosions and shit, McLean. Don't even worry about it.
that, honestly, like one of the
I'm
careers
just picturing the guy from Tropic Thunder with like the vest filled with explosives. Who's this? Is that guy? Who's
Like
this?
you turning up to set, like, what's up?
one of the first things I wanted to do when I decided wanted to do film was like pyrotechnics and shit, because I'm like, that looks so fucking fun.
Tyler, me and you have a weird amount of stuff in common.
I feel like you guys would like blow each other up by accident or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But by the time
Yeah.
I get there, we'll probably be like far enough into the future where like limbs are replaceable. I don't give a fuck about
Yeah.
it.
Just me and Tyler from the neck down will both be robots.
Jesus.
I'll
Like,
be
let's blow it up,
Gen-
guys.
I'll be like General Grievous.
How about you, Tyler? What's a historic event?
Both of my choices are funny enough because we've been bashing war movies this entire time. Like, man,
I know. I'm gonna do the same thing.
did I
probably.
really want to make a World War One movie about Russians who, like, man, we got to fight in World War One, but like our fucking home is like falling apart right now, so like we got to deal with that shit over there, but we also got to deal with this shit over here for some reason because we're told.
Why does that sound familiar?
I don't know. That was one of the first movies that was like when I was, that was an idea that I had in high school that was like, ooh, this would be great. I don't know why they didn't do this.
I do love that Russian mentality, or like in Russian imperialism mentality. It was like, holy God, we're gonna have a civil war. We better go miles and miles away with our army and everything else. That's kind of like walking in your house and go, oh, my house is flooding.
We
My
gotta get
mailbox
out of
looks
here.
a little crooked. I better do something about that.
Obviously, I'm not Russian, so I don't really have authority to speak on Russian behalf.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not Vietnamese, so you know.
Yeah, but the other one is also a World War One movie, and we're going to be talking about this very soon. It's Harlem Hellfighters.
Yay!
Those dudes deserve a fucking movie, and we need to give more credit where credit is due.
I think me and you have talked about co-writing that movie.
Yes.
My event is a really weird one. I want to do a comedy on the Russian Revolution.
Oh, I'm on board. I
Like,
will see it. You have my patronage.
Like, I don't mean like, yeah, basically Death of Stalin, but like Jojo Rabbit almost. Russian Revolution. Where it's like, I want Stalin to be just depicted as like just a raging lunatic. I want Trotsky as the most pathetic nerd to ever live, because he kind of was. He really was.
Yeah, fucking fuck Trotsky.
And then the only other event Tyler said it, Harlem Hellfighters, because they get no credit in media whatsoever. But we just talked about him in our last episode, Joseph Burley, who fought for both the United States and the Soviet Union.
What a king.
Or Leo Majors, who, you know, fucking got blown up and then kept fighting and then sieged a town by himself.
Both absolute kings deserve their own movie.
Check out that episode, The Mad Men of History Part 1, because that will be a reoccurring series.
I'm very excited. I'm very excited for more of that.
Yeah. I think our next episode on that is going to tie into, because we're going to plan on doing some more Black History Month stuff before the month's over. That obviously our Harlem Hellfighters episode. But yeah, thank you all for listening. Thanks to our guests.
Yes, thank you
See
for
you next
having me
week.
again. Bye.